Banker sees orphan boy make his deaf son smile, and everything changes. Richard Thompson froze mid-step on the sidewalk when he saw something he thought impossible. His heart raced as he watched the scene unfolding in the square across from his bank in downtown New York. His 6-year-old son Ethan was smiling. Not a timid or forced smile like the ones Richard had tried to coax from him during years of expensive therapies and endless sessions with specialists. This was a genuine, beaming, full-of-life smile. And the one causing this joy was a barefoot boy in torn clothes and messy hair, gesturing wildly with dirty hands. Richard watched for a few more seconds, trying to process what he was seeing. Ethan, who had been born deaf and never shown interest in other children, seemed completely absorbed in the play. The street boy made theatrical movements, imitating a bird flying, then a fish swimming, and Ethan responded with crystal-clear laughter Richard had never heard before. The nanny, Margaret, a 60-year-old woman who had cared for Ethan for 3 years, looked equally surprised. She had stopped a few feet behind, holding the boy's school backpack, watching the interaction with disbelief. Richard took a few steps toward his son but stopped when he realized his approach might interrupt this magical moment. The orphan boy, his appearance made it obvious he lived on the streets, had invented a unique way to communicate. He didn't just gesture, he used his whole body to tell stories. He jumped, spun, made exaggerated faces, and Ethan followed every movement with an attention Richard had never witnessed. The executive felt a tightness in his chest. During Ethan's 6 years of life, he had spent a fortune on treatments, the best speech therapists in the country, specialists in deaf children, child psychologists, all had tried to spark his son's interest in the world around him. Yet here was a dirty boy, likely illiterate, achieving what modern medicine couldn't. "Mr. Thompson," Margaret had approached, whispering to avoid interrupting the play. "I've never seen Ethan like this." Richard nodded, unable to speak. He watched as the orphan boy began imitating a monkey, scratching his head and making funny expressions. Ethan burst into laughter, clapping enthusiastically. It was the first time Richard had seen his son interact naturally with another child. The moment was interrupted when Mike, the bank's security guard, approached the street boy. "Hey kid, you can't beg here. Get going before I call patrol." Ethan's smile vanished instantly. He looked around, trying to understand why the play had stopped. The orphan boy lowered his arms, the joy fading from his face. Richard felt a sudden anger. "Mike, leave the boy alone," he said, stepping forward. The guard turned, surprised to see his boss. "Sorry, Mr. Thompson, I didn't know you were here. Thought he was just another street rat bothering customers. He's playing with my son. He's not bothering anyone." Mike looked confused, glancing between Richard and Ethan, who had hidden behind Margaret. "Playing? Ethan doesn't what?" Richard cut in, his voice tense in a way that surprised even himself. The guard swallowed hard. "Sorry, sir. Just meant I've never seen the boy take to other kids." Richard looked at the orphan boy, who stood still, watching the exchange with cautious eyes. There was something in the boy's gaze that intrigued him, a sharp intelligence, as if he understood the situation perfectly. "What's your name, son?" Richard asked, crouching down to the child's level. The boy hesitated for a moment before answering. "Jacob, sir." His voice was clear, but there was a shyness that contrasted with the energy he had shown moments earlier. "Jacob, do you live around here?" The boy vaguely pointed toward the underpass a few blocks away. "Sometimes. Depends on the day." Richard felt his heart tighten. He knew that area well. It was where the homeless took shelter during cold nights. "How old are you?" "I think 8, maybe 9. I'm not sure." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The uncertainty in the boy's voice struck Richard unexpectedly. He glanced at Ethan, who had stepped out from behind Margaret and moved closer to Jacob again. The two boys exchanged a look that spoke volumes beyond words. "Ethan seems to like you a lot," Richard said. "How did you two meet?" Jacob shrugged. "He always passes by here in the morning on his way to school. Sometimes he stops in the square while his aunt talks to other people. I sit over there." He pointed to a nearby bench. Yesterday he kept looking at me, so I did some silly things to make him laugh. And did you know he's deaf? Jacob shook his head. Not at first, but I noticed he didn't react when I talked, only when I moved my hands or made faces. Then I figured it out. Richard was impressed by the boy's awareness. Many adults took much longer to recognize Ethan's condition. Have you met other deaf children before? No, sir, but my mum always said everyone understands the world in their own way. Some people hear with their ears, others with their eyes, others with their heart. The simplicity and depth of the answer left Richard speechless. Margaret, who had stayed quiet until then, stepped forward. Mr. Thompson, we need to take Ethan to school. We're already late. Richard checked his watch. It was true. Ethan should have been at the specialized institution 20 minutes ago, but the thought of interrupting this unique connection troubled him deeply. Jacob, will you be here tomorrow? The boy nodded. I'm usually around in the mornings. It's safer than other places. Then maybe Ethan can play with you again before school. Jacob's eyes lit up, but he quickly looked down. You won't get in trouble because of me. That guy over there, he pointed at Mike, said, I'm not allowed to stay. Richard turned to the security guard, who had kept a respectful distance. Mike, from now on, Jacob has permission to stay in the square. If anyone bothers him, you call me, understood? Yes, sir. Whatever you say. Richard turned back to Jacob. Are you hungry? The boy hesitated before nodding. A little. Margaret, get Jacob something to eat before taking Ethan to school. Of course, sir. While Margaret headed to the nearby bakery with Jacob, Richard knelt in front of Ethan. His son looked at him curiously, as if sensing something important had happened. Richard tried a few basic signs he'd learned in his classes. Ethan responded shyly, but Richard noticed his son's movements were smoother and more expressive than they usually were during therapy sessions. When Margaret returned with a sandwich and juice for Jacob, Richard watched Ethan's reaction. His son pointed at the food and then at himself, making gestures Richard interpreted as a question about why he didn't have any. Ethan already had breakfast at home, Richard explained to Jacob, but tomorrow we can bring something for both of you to share. Jacob smiled as he took a bite of his sandwich. Thank you, sir. No one has ever been so kind to me. The boy's simple words echoed in Richard Thompson's mind all the way to the office. He had built a financial empire, controlled millions of dollars in investments, made decisions that affected hundreds of employees. But a simple sandwich for a hungry child had been described as the greatest kindness anyone had ever shown them. Arriving at his office on the 30th floor of the building, Richard tried to focus on work, but his mind kept returning to the morning's scene. His secretary, Mrs. Wilson, noticed his distraction. Is something wrong, Mr. Thompson? Patricia had worked with him for 15 years and knew his moods well. She was a woman in her 50s, efficient and discreet, who had become almost a confidant over the years. Patricia, do you have children? The question surprised her. 3, sir. Why? What were they like when they were little? Did they play easily with other children? Patricia smiled. Oh, they were terrible. They'd make friends with anyone in 5 minutes. Once, my youngest brought home a girl she'd just met in the square, saying they were best friends. Richard nodded thoughtfully. And if your children had some difficulty, how would you handle that? Patricia studied him more closely. Is everything all right with Ethan? Richard sighed. Today he interacted with another child for the first time, a homeless boy. It was surprising. That's wonderful. Ethan's never shown interest in other children before. Exactly. And it made me wonder if maybe I've been doing something wrong. I've spent a fortune on specialists, and a street kid accomplished in 10 minutes what no one else could in 6 years. Patricia reflected for a moment. Maybe it's because the boy didn't know it was supposed to be difficult. Sometimes adults complicate simple things. Her observation lingered in Richard's mind. Perhaps all the specialists, with their elaborate techniques and scientific methods, had lost sight of something fundamental, the naturalness of children's interactions. The rest of the day passed slowly. Richard cancelled 2 important meetings, something unthinkable for him until now. His mind was entirely occupied with thoughts of Ethan and Jacob. By 5 in the afternoon, he decided to leave early. He wanted to talk to Jennifer, his wife, about what had happened that morning. The Thompson mansion stood in a gated community in the Upper East Side of New York. It was an imposing home, with well-kept gardens and a pool Ethan had never shown interest in using. Richard found Jennifer in the living room, flipping through a decorating magazine. Jennifer Thompson was an elegant 32-year-old woman who had given up her advertising career after Ethan's birth. In recent years, she had devoted herself entirely to their son and the social activities of the community. "You're home early today," she remarked without looking up. "We need to talk about Ethan." Jennifer finally met his gaze, concern flashing across her face. "Did something happen? Is he all right?" "Better than all right. Today he smiled," Jennifer. Really smiled. She set the magazine aside. "What do you mean?" Richard recounted the morning's encounter, describing every detail of Ethan and Jacob's interaction. He watched Jennifer's expression shift from skepticism to surprise, and finally to something he hadn't seen in a long time: hope. "Are you sure you're not exaggerating?" she asked. "Ethan has smiled before." "Not like this, Jennifer, never like this. He was genuinely happy." Jennifer stood and began pacing the room. "And this boy, he's really homeless? Apparently, lives near the underpass, doesn't even know his own age." "Richard, you can't expose Ethan to that kind of situation. It could be dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "The boy is 8 or 9 years old, Jennifer. Street kids could have diseases, could be involved with dangerous people. What if he teaches Ethan the wrong things?" Richard felt his irritation growing. "What wrong things? He taught our son to smile, Jennifer. When was the last time you saw Ethan truly happy?" Jennifer stopped walking and looked at him with a wounded expression. "Are you implying I don't take good care of him?" "That's not it. But maybe we've been too overprotective. Maybe Ethan needs more contact with other kids, even if they're not from our social circle." "Our social circle exists for a reason, Richard. To protect our family." "Protect from what?" "From humanity." The argument was interrupted by Margaret's arrival with Ethan. The boy ran into the room, something unusual for him, as he was usually more reserved. He went straight to Richard and began making animated gestures. Richard recognized some signs: friend, play, tomorrow, and realized Ethan was trying to tell him about Jacob. "He's asking if he'll see his friend tomorrow," Jennifer translated, surprised. "I've never seen him so excited to talk about someone." "Margaret, how was the rest of the day?" Richard asked. The nanny smiled. "It was incredible, sir. At school, Ethan kept trying to teach his classmates the signs Jacob had shown him. The teacher was impressed by how eager he was to communicate." Jennifer looked at Richard with a complicated expression, part surprise, part reluctance. "One morning, and he's already made this much of an impact." "Seems so," Richard replied. "And I think we should give this friendship a chance to grow." "With supervision," Jennifer added quickly. "And we need to know more about this boy, where he comes from, how long he's been on the streets, if he has family." Richard agreed. It was a sensible approach. "Tomorrow I'll talk to him more. Maybe we can help in some way." That night, as he put Ethan to bed, Richard noticed his son seemed calmer than usual. Normally, Ethan struggled to fall asleep, tossing and turning for a long time, but that night he drifted off quickly, a small smile on his face. Richard watched him sleep for a few minutes, reflecting on how much a single day had changed things. For the first time in years, he felt genuine hope that Ethan might have a more normal childhood. The next morning, Richard woke earlier than usual. He was eager to see if Jacob would show up at the square again. During breakfast, he watched Ethan, who seemed just as eager. The boy ate faster than usual and waited by the door, a clear sign he wanted to leave. "Does he even know what time it is?" Jennifer asked, observing their son's behavior. "I think he has an internal clock for things that matter," Richard replied. "Like when he goes to the doctor he likes." They left the house 15 minutes early. Richard had asked his driver, Mr. Johnson, to stop by the bakery to pick up some extra snacks. Robert Johnson, no relation to Richard, despite the shared last name, was a 62-year-old man who had worked for the family for over a decade. He'd been a cab driver before becoming a private chauffeur and had a practical wisdom Richard admired. "Sir, can I ask you something?" Robert said as he drove. "Of course." Yesterday, Margaret told me about a boy who played with Ethan. Is it true he's never taken an interest in other kids before? Richard glanced at Ethan in the back seat, who was anxiously watching out the window. Sadly, it's true. Since he was little, he's always been very reserved around strangers. You know, I had a deaf cousin, Robert continued. He died about 10 years ago, but when we were kids, he was the most popular in our group. He made up games that didn't need sound, made everyone laugh with his antics. How did he do that? I think it was because he saw the world differently. He noticed things the rest of us ignored, and the other kids found that interesting. Richard reflected on Robert's words. Maybe the problem wasn't Ethan being different, but the world around him not knowing how to handle that difference. When they arrived at the square, Jacob was already there, sitting on the same bench as the day before. Richard noticed the boy had tried to clean up a bit. His face was less dirty, and he'd combed his hair with his fingers. Ethan got out of the car before Richard even stopped and ran toward his new friend. The interaction was immediate. Jacob stood up, and the two began an intricate dance of gestures and expressions. Richard watched, fascinated, as the boys had developed their own language in just 24 hours. "Good morning, Jacob," Richard said as he approached. "Good morning, sir. Thank you for letting me play with Ethan again. Actually, I wanted to talk to you. Do you have a few minutes?" Jacob nodded, but kept making gestures to Ethan, who responded with laughter. "Jacob, where did you sleep last night?" The boy hesitated. "Under the underpass. There's a more sheltered spot there." "And you're alone? No adult looking after you?" "Sometimes there are other kids around, but we don't stick together. It's safer to keep to ourselves." Richard's heart ached. "How long have you been living on the streets?" Jacob looked up at the sky as if calculating. "I think about 3 years, maybe 4. "And before that?" "I lived with my grandmother, but she got really sick and—" His voice faltered. "Then I went to stay at a place with other kids, but I didn't like it there. I ran away." Richard understood Jacob was talking about a shelter. "Why didn't you like it?" Jacob shrugged. "The men there were really mean. They'd hit us if we did something wrong, and there were too many kids, so there was never enough food." The simplicity with which Jacob described such terrible things struck Richard. There was no self-pity in the boy's voice, just a matter-of-fact acceptance of reality. "Jacob, would you like to have a home again?" The boy looked at Ethan, who was playing with some pebbles on the ground. "Sometimes I think about it, but I don't know if I'd remember how to live in a house. I'm used to the streets now." "But aren't you scared? Don't you get cold?" "Yeah, sometimes, but I've learned to manage. And now I have Ethan to play with in the mornings. That makes me happy." The purity of the answer touched Richard deeply. Jacob had found joy in a small daily interaction, even while living in such hardship. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. Margaret approached with the breakfast Richard had asked her to buy. "Jacob, we brought breakfast for both of you." The boy's eyes lit up at the sight of the bread, fruit, and juice. He gestured to Ethan, who immediately understood they were to share the food. Richard watched as the two boys naturally split everything, Ethan offering half his apple to Jacob, and Jacob breaking his bread in two to give his friend a piece. It was a lesson in generosity many adults could learn. "Mr. Thompson," Margaret said quietly, "may I suggest something?" "Of course." "What if Jacob came over sometimes to shower and eat a proper meal, just so he can take better care of himself?" Richard considered the idea. It was sensible, but he knew Jennifer wouldn't easily agree. "Let's take it slow, Margaret. First, I need to talk to my wife." Just then, a man approached the square. He was wearing a uniform that Richard recognized as belonging to the city's social services. "Excuse me," the man said. "Have you seen a little boy around here? Curly hair, about 8 years old?" Richard felt Jacob tense up beside him. "Why are you looking for him?" Richard asked. "I'm a social worker. The boy ran away from the shelter a few days ago, and we've had reports that he's been wandering around this area." Jacob partially hid behind Richard. "And what happens if you find him?" Richard continued. "He goes back to the shelter, of course. He's a minor. He can't stay on the streets." Richard looked at Jacob, who was watching him with pleading eyes. What if he doesn't want to go back? The social worker seemed surprised by the question. Sir, children don't get a choice in these situations. It's for their own good. What if someone takes responsibility for him, a family willing to care for him? That would require starting an adoption or temporary guardianship process, but that takes time and has many requirements. Richard made an impulsive decision. Jacob isn't wandering, he's under my supervision. The social worker eyed him skeptically. And you are? Richard Thompson, president of Thompson and Associates Bank, he said, handing over his business card. This boy is well cared for. The man examined the card, clearly impressed by Richard's position. I see, but even so, his situation would need to be formalized. You can't just take a child out of the system without legal procedures. How long does that process take? A few weeks if everything goes smoothly. But first, we'd need to assess whether you meet the requirements for temporary guardianship. Richard nodded. Then let's start the process today. Where do I need to go? The social worker seemed caught off guard by Richard's quick decision. Well, first you'd need to go to family court, but I recommend consulting a lawyer specializing in family law. Perfect. Jacob, do you want to stay with me while we sort this out? The boy nodded vigorously. But where will he stay? The social worker asked. Richard looked at Jacob, then at Ethan, who had stopped playing to listen. With me, in my home. The statement even surprised Richard. He hadn't planned it, but the words came out naturally. Mr. Thompson, do you understand the responsibility you're taking on? I understand perfectly. The social worker jotted down some notes and handed Richard a card. Come to our office tomorrow morning, we'll start the paperwork. After the man walked away, Richard knelt in front of Jacob. Jacob, do you really want to come live with me and Ethan? The boy looked at Ethan, then at Richard. Can I keep playing with him every day? Of course. You'd be like brothers? Jacob smiled, but his expression soon turned worried. What if your wife doesn't like me? Richard took a deep breath. We'll talk to her together. I'm sure once she meets you, she'll understand why you're special. Margaret, who had been silently listening the whole time, stepped closer. Mr. Thompson, if I may, I think it's a beautiful decision. Ethan needs a brother, and Jacob needs a family. Richard looked at the two boys, who had gone back to playing as if nothing had happened. Ethan was teaching Jacob how to write his name in the sand with a stick, and Jacob was showing Ethan how to make hand shadows on the wall. Margaret, can you stay with the boys a little longer? I need to go home and talk to Jennifer before bringing Jacob. Of course, sir. We'll take care of everything here. In the car on the way home, Richard reflected on the impulsive decision he'd made. In just a few minutes, he'd committed to caring for a child he'd known for only 2 days. Anyone would say he'd lost his mind. But when he thought of Ethan's smile and how Jacob had transformed his son in just 48 hours, Richard was certain he'd done the right thing. The problem would be convincing Jennifer. He found his wife in the kitchen, having coffee and chatting with Sharon, the family cook. Sharon had worked for them for 5 years, a 60-year-old woman, mother of 4, who'd become something of an informal counselor to Jennifer. Richard, why are you back so early? Jennifer asked, noticing the tension in her husband's expression. We need to talk. It's about Jacob. Jennifer dismissed Sharon with a wave and pointed to the chair beside the table. What happened? Richard told her about the meeting with the social worker, about Jacob living on the streets, and finally about his decision to take custody of the boy. The silence that followed was deafening. You did what? Jennifer finally asked, her voice quiet but thick with disbelief. I took responsibility for him. Jennifer, you should see how different Ethan is. In 2 days, this boy managed to... Richard, have you completely lost your mind? You don't adopt a child on impulse. It's not impulse. It's the right thing to do. Jennifer stood abruptly. The right thing. Richard, we barely know this child. We know nothing about his past, his family, possible behavioral issues. He's 8 years old, Jennifer. What behavioral issues could an 8-year-old have? Children who live on the streets go through trauma. They might struggle to adapt. They might be violent. They might what, Jennifer? Might teach our son how to smile. Because that's what Jacob is doing. Jennifer paced the kitchen, running her hands through her hair. Richard, think rationally. We have a structured life. Ethan attends a specialized school, has therapy, has an established routine. You want to throw all that away for a boy we met 2 days ago? I'm not throwing anything away. I'm trying to give our son something he's never had. A friend, a brother. And what if it doesn't work? What if Jacob doesn't adjust? What if he influences Ethan negatively? Richard stepped in front of his wife. Jennifer, look me in the eyes. When was the last time you saw Ethan genuinely happy? The question hit her like a blow. Jennifer lowered her gaze. That's not fair. It's the truth. Our son lives in a protective bubble that doesn't let him be a child. Jacob pulled him out of it in minutes. What if we're making a terrible mistake? Richard took her hands. Jennifer, our whole life is built on calculated, planned, safe decisions. But sometimes, the best things happen when we step out of our comfort zone. Jennifer held his gaze for a long moment. You've already made up your mind, haven't you? No matter what I think. I want this to be our decision. But yes, I believe it's what we should do. Jennifer let out a deep sigh. I want to get to know Jacob properly before he sets foot in this house. I want to talk to him, understand who he is. That's fair. And I want him to have a full medical evaluation. We need to know if he has any health issues. Richard nodded. Agreed. And I want clear rules from the start. If he lives here, he follows our rules, our routine. I agree. Jennifer sat back down, suddenly looking exhausted. Richard, I'm scared. Scared this will change our family in ways we can't control. Richard sat beside her and pulled her close. I'm scared too, Jennifer, but I'm more afraid of watching Ethan grow up isolated, never knowing the joy of having a brother, a real friend. What if Jacob decides to leave? Ethan will be devastated. Then we'll do everything to make him want to stay. We'll be the family Jacob never had. Jennifer remained silent for a few minutes, clearly processing everything. Where will he sleep? Richard smiled, noticing she was starting to accept the idea. I thought of the guest room next to Ethan's. That way they can communicate easily. We'll need to buy clothes, shoes, school supplies. We'll take care of all that. Step by step. Jennifer sighed again. When do you want to bring him? This afternoon, after you talk to him and feel more comfortable. And Ethan? Does he know about all this? Not yet. But I think he'll be happy. At that moment, Sharon returned to the kitchen. Excuse me, Mrs. Jennifer, but I couldn't help overhearing part of the conversation. If I may give my opinion, Jennifer gestured for her to continue. I think you're doing a very beautiful thing. Ethan has always been such a lonely boy, even with all the attention you give him. Having a little brother could be very good for him. You don't think it's risky? Jennifer asked. Sharon shook her head. Mrs. Jennifer, I raised 4 children practically on my own. I've learned that a good child is one with love in their heart. And if this boy is making Ethan smile, it's because he has a lot of love in his heart. Sharon's simple wisdom touched Jennifer in a way that all of Richard's rational arguments hadn't. All right, Jennifer finally said. We'll try. But if it doesn't work out, we'll handle it together, Richard finished. An hour later, Richard returned to the square to pick up Jacob and Ethan. The two were playing with a group of pigeons, Jacob making gestures that seemed to mimic the bird's flight, while Ethan tried to copy the movements. Jacob, Richard called, my wife would like to meet you. Would you like to come to our home? The boy looked nervous. Will she like me? I'm sure she will, but she'll have some questions. Is that okay? Jacob nodded. And if she doesn't? Richard knelt to the boy's height. Jacob, you made my son smile for the first time in 6 years. How could she not like you? The ride home was tense. Jacob watched everything through the car window, with a mix of wonder and apprehension. When they arrived at the gated community, he was even more impressed. You live in such a beautiful place, he commented. Now you'll live here too, Ethan replied in signs, which Jacob was starting to understand. At the entrance of the house, Jennifer was waiting. She had dressed carefully for the meeting, choosing casual clothes to avoid intimidating Jacob. Hello, Jacob, she said with a smile that, though nervous, was genuine. I'm Jennifer, Ethan's mother. Jacob stood still for a moment, clearly awed by the elegance of the house and Jennifer herself. "Hi, Mum. Thank you for letting me come here." Jennifer knelt to his level. "Would you like to see the house?" During the tour, Jennifer watched Jacob's reactions closely. The boy was amazed by Ethan's room, full of toys and books. But what caught his attention most was the garden. "Can I touch the plants?" he asked. "Of course. Do you like plants?" "My grandma had a small garden. She taught me how to care for flowers." Jennifer felt a pang of emotion imagining Jacob, even smaller, tending to plants with his grandmother. In the kitchen, Sharon had prepared a special snack. Jacob ate heartily but without greed, showing manners that surprised Jennifer. "Jacob," she said during the snack, "Richard told me you lived on the streets for a few years. Could you tell me a little about that?" Jacob hesitated, glancing at Ethan, who was beside him. "I don't like talking about it much, but if you want to know, only if you're comfortable." Jacob shared a brief version of his story. His grandmother, who raised him, her illness, the time in the shelter, running away to the streets. Jennifer noticed he was leaving out the hardest details, probably to avoid worrying Ethan. "And how did you learn to communicate so well with Ethan?" she asked. "I can't really explain. I think when you can't use words, you learn to use other things. My grandmother couldn't speak at the end because of her illness, so I learned to understand her through her eyes, through her gestures." The simplicity with which Jacob explained such complex things impressed Jennifer. "Jacob, would you like to live here with us?" The boy looked around the kitchen, then at Ethan, then at her. "Very much, but what if I don't know how to be part of a family? It's been a long time since I've lived with adults." Jennifer felt her heart tighten. "We'll learn together. You teach us how to be your family, and we'll teach you how to be our son." Jacob smiled, and Jennifer saw in his smile the same purity that had won over Richard. "Can I call you Mom and Dad?" The question caught Jennifer off guard. She looked at Richard, who nodded encouragingly. "If you want to, of course." "And will Ethan really be my brother?" "Really?" Jacob got up from his chair and impulsively hugged Jennifer. She returned the embrace, feeling tears well up in her eyes. "Thank you for letting me stay," Jacob whispered. At that moment, Jennifer understood that Richard had made the right decision. That boy wasn't a problem to be solved. He was a gift. Life was giving their family. The following days were full of intense adjustment. Jacob underwent thorough medical exams. He was malnourished but had no serious health issues. They bought clothes, shoes, school supplies. The guest room was redecorated to become Jacob's room. The boy adapted to the household routine with an ease that surprised everyone. He woke up early, helped Sharon in the kitchen, played with Ethan before school. At night, the two boys developed their own ritual. They told each other stories using gestures, drawings, and even shadows on the wall. The biggest change was in Ethan. The deaf boy, who had always been withdrawn and dependent on adults, began showing growing independence. He helped Jacob with chores, taught him basic signs, showed him the best spots in the garden. At the specialized school, the teachers noticed the immediate transformation. Ethan was more communicative, more interested in activities, more willing to interact with other children. "It's remarkable," said Dr. Reynolds, the educational psychologist who had been working with Ethan for 2 years. "In 2 weeks, he's made more progress than in the last 6 months." Richard and Jennifer were at the monthly follow-up appointment. "Have you changed anything in his routine?" she asked. Richard and Jennifer exchanged glances. "He has a brother now," Jennifer explained. "An adoptive brother." "Yes, a boy who was an orphan. They got along wonderfully from the first day." Dr. Reynolds took notes. "That explains a lot. Deaf children often benefit greatly from constant companionship, especially from other children." "Is the brother also deaf?" "No," Richard answered, "but he has a natural ability to communicate with Ethan." "Interesting. Would you like to bring this brother to the next appointment? I'd like to observe their interaction." The following week, Jacob accompanied Ethan to the appointment. Dr. Reynolds was fascinated watching how the two boys communicated. Jacob had developed his own language, mixing basic signs with expressive gestures and theatrical mimicry. "Where did you learn this?" she asked Jacob. I didn't. I just made it up as Ethan understood. You have a natural talent for non-verbal communication. Have you ever thought about being a teacher? Jacob laughed. Never thought I'd be anything. Always figured I wouldn't live very long. The brutal honesty of his answer silenced the room. Dr. Rachel looked at Richard and Jennifer with a serious expression. Children who have lived on the streets often develop a very pragmatic view of life, but they also develop extraordinary survival skills. Jacob clearly has very advanced emotional intelligence. After the appointment in the car, Ethan signed to Jacob, who translated for his parents. He wants to know if the doctor liked me. Jennifer turned to the boys in the back seat. She adored you, Jacob. She said you're very smart. Jacob blushed. No one ever said I was smart before. Well, you're hearing it now, Richard said, and it won't be the last time. 2 weeks later, the most anticipated and dreaded moment arrived, Jacob's first day of school. Richard had decided to enroll both boys in the same institution. Ethan would continue in special education classes, but Jacob would attend regular classes appropriate for his age. The school principal, Dr. Roberts, had been briefed on Jacob's special circumstances. I understand he's faced some hardships, she said during the enrollment meeting. We are prepared to offer psychological support if needed. I'm not sure it'll be necessary, Jennifer replied. Jacob has adjusted very well to our family. Still, it's a significant transition. From the streets to an Upper East Side home, from having no family to having parents and a brother. Even if he seems to be handling it well, there may be underlying issues. Richard agreed it was better to err on the side of caution. On the first day of school, Jacob was visibly nervous. He had woken up earlier than usual and barely touched his breakfast. What if the other kids don't like me? He asked Jennifer. Why wouldn't they? You're a wonderful boy. Because I used to live on the street. Because I don't know some things they do. Jennifer knelt in front of Jacob. Jacob, you know plenty of things they'll never know. You know how to be brave, how to survive, how to make friends. Those are very valuable skills. At school, Jacob said goodbye to Ethan with a special hug and headed to his classroom. Jennifer and Richard waited in the parking lot for a few minutes, anxious. Do you think we did the right thing? Jennifer asked. I'm sure of it. Jacob is more resilient than we realize. At 5 in the afternoon, when they went to pick up the boys, they found Jacob surrounded by a group of kids at the school exit. He was making exaggerated gestures, clearly telling a story while the others laughed and asked questions. How was your first day? Richard asked when Jacob approached. It was amazing. The teacher asked me to talk about what it's like living on the street, so I made up some funny stories so no one would feel sad. And they asked a lot of questions about how I communicate with Ethan. Ethan came running over and signed excitedly to Jacob, who translated. He's saying his classmates were impressed because I understand his signs. Some even asked me to teach them. Jennifer and Richard exchanged satisfied glances. Sounds like you two were a hit, Jennifer said. During dinner, Jacob recounted his first day in detail. He had done well in math, struggled with English, especially writing, but loved science. The teacher said I can stay after school a few times a week for extra help with English, he explained. I don't write very well yet. We'll hire a tutor to help, Richard said. There's no rush, you'll learn at your own pace. Really? Of course. We'll give you all the support you need. Jacob smiled, but then grew serious. Dad, Mom, can I ask you something? It was the first time he had naturally called them Dad and Mom without hesitation. Of course, Jennifer replied. You won't send me away if I do poorly in school. The question broke Jennifer's heart. Jacob, you're our son now. Sons aren't sent away no matter what happens. They might make mistakes, they might struggle, but they're still loved. Even if I do something really wrong? Richard leaned forward. Jacob, within reasonable limits, yes. You'd have to do something truly terrible for that to change. And from what I know of you, I don't believe that will happen. Jacob fell silent for a moment, processing the words. It's different from what I thought having a family would be like. What did you think it would be like? Jennifer asked. I thought I had to be perfect all the time so I wouldn't be sent away, like at the shelter. Here you can be imperfect. In fact, all of us are imperfect. That's how families work. That night, Jennifer went to say goodnight to the boys and found them in Jacob's room. Ethan was teaching his brother how to write words in English, while Jacob was showing Ethan how to make simple origami with notebook paper. "You two doing okay in here?" she asked. "Yes, Mom," they answered almost at the same time, Ethan in sign language and Jacob out loud. Jennifer smiled and closed the door, leaving the brothers to their nighttime activities. 3 months after Jacob's arrival, the Thompson family had settled into a new routine. Mornings began with the boys having breakfast together, while Jennifer reviewed Jacob's homework and Richard read the news. Ethan had started vocalizing more, inspired by Jacob's efforts to learn written English. Jacob's progress in school was remarkable. With the help of his tutor, Mr. Anderson, a retired 65-year-old who had spent his career teaching adults to read, Jacob was quickly overcoming his academic gaps. "I've never seen a child so eager to learn," Mr. Anderson remarked to Richard after one session. "He absorbs knowledge like a sponge." "It's natural, considering he missed years of formal schooling," Richard replied. "It's more than that. Jacob has a genuine intellectual curiosity. He asks questions that show critical thinking well beyond his age." Richard watched through the window as Jacob and Ethan played in the yard. The two were building a little birdhouse with pieces of wood Mr. Johnson had given them. "Mr. Anderson, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course. Did you have children?" "I had 3, all grown now with families of their own." "What was it like watching them grow up?" Mr. Anderson smiled. "It's one of the most rewarding and terrifying experiences in life. You want to protect them from everything, but you also want them to be independent. It's a delicate balance." "And when they faced difficulties?" "I suffered with them, but I tried not to solve their problems for them. Children need to learn to overcome obstacles to become resilient adults." Richard reflected on the teacher's words. Since Jacob's arrival, he had constantly worried about creating the perfect environment for the boys, especially for Jacob, who had already endured so much. "Do you think I'm being overprotective with Jacob?" Mr. Anderson looked at the boys in the yard. "Can I point something out? Jacob is teaching Ethan how to use the hammer. See how careful he is. But he doesn't do the work for his brother. He lets Ethan try, guides him when needed, celebrates his successes. That's very mature behavior for a child his age." Richard watched the scene. Jacob truly showed patience and wisdom that seemed beyond his 9 years. It's amazing how he looks after Ethan. Jacob developed caretaking skills early out of necessity. Children who've been through hardship often mature faster in certain ways. But that also means he might be carrying responsibilities he shouldn't have to. "What do you mean?" "Notice how he always makes sure Ethan is okay before allowing himself to have fun. How he only starts eating after seeing Ethan has begun. These are behaviors of someone who's been responsible for their own survival and maybe others." Richard hadn't noticed these details, but now that Mr. Anderson mentioned it, he could clearly see the patterns. "What should I do?" "Keep offering love and security. But also give Jacob permission to be a child. Show him it's not his job to take care of everyone." That night during dinner, Richard decided to put Mr. Anderson's advice into practice. "Jacob, you don't have to wait for everyone to start eating before you begin," he said casually. Jacob looked confused. "But it's polite to wait, isn't it?" "It is, but at home we can be less formal. You can start whenever you want." "What if Ethan needs help cutting his meat?" Jennifer chimed in. "Jacob, Ethan is learning to cut by himself. If he needs help, Dad or I will step in. You can focus on your own food." Jacob hesitated, but started eating. During the meal, Richard noticed how the boy gradually relaxed when he realized he didn't have to constantly monitor Ethan's well-being. After dinner, while the boys did their homework, Jennifer and Richard talked in the living room. "Mr. Anderson made me realize some things about Jacob." Richard shared the conversation with the teacher. "It's true. Sometimes I feel he's more concerned about our happiness than his own," Jennifer replied. "Yesterday he asked me if I regretted adopting him. And what did you say?" "That it was the best decision we've made in years." "And it's true, Richard. Our family was incomplete. We didn't know it, but it was." Richard agreed. The months with Jacob had changed, not just Ethan, but the whole family dynamic. There was more laughter in the house, more conversations during meals. more life. Jennifer, can I confess something? Of course. Before Jacob came, I felt like a failure as a father. I couldn't connect with Ethan the way I wanted. I thought it was because he's deaf. But now I realize maybe it was because I didn't know how to be spontaneous. Jennifer took her husband's hand. Jacob has taught us so much. About simplicity, about finding joy in little things. And about courage. Seeing a 9-year-old boy start life over with so much optimism makes me question my own complaints about small everyday problems. Just then they heard laughter coming from the boys' room. They went to check and found Jacob and Ethan trying to build a tent with sheets and pillows. "What are you two up to?" Jennifer asked. "Indoor camping," Jacob explained. "Ethan's never been camping, so I thought I'd show him what it's like. Sort of." "Have you ever camped for real?" Richard asked. Jacob hesitated. "On the street, we always slept outside. It's not the same, but close." Richard felt a pang of sadness imagining Jacob, even younger, sleeping in unsafe places. But he admired how the boy could turn tough memories into positive experiences for his brother. "Need any help with the tent?" "Can we try by ourselves first?" Jacob asked. "Of course. Call us if you need anything." 2 hours later, when they went to say goodnight, they found an impressive structure made of sheets, pillows, and chairs. The two were inside the tent, telling stories with a flashlight they'd grabbed from the kitchen. "Can we sleep in the tent tonight?" Ethan asked in sign language. Jennifer translated for Richard, who smiled. "If you want to, that's fine. But school's early tomorrow, so no staying up too late." The boys cheered and went back to their stories. The next morning, Jennifer found the two boys asleep in each other's arms in the middle of the collapsed fort. Ethan had his head resting on Jacob's shoulder, while Jacob held his brother's hand. The sight moved Jennifer deeply. It was a visual representation of what their family had become, two very different boys, each with their own unique needs and traits, yet bound by genuine love and mutual understanding. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. 6 months after Jacob's arrival, the Thompson family had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings began with the boys preparing their own breakfast, a tradition that had started when Jacob wanted to show Ethan how to make special sandwiches with creative ingredients. Richard had cut back on his hours at the bank, delegating more responsibilities so he could focus on his family. Jennifer had returned to working part-time at an advertising agency, feeling more professionally fulfilled now that the boys were more independent. Ethan's progress at school continued to impress his teachers. He had started interacting more with other deaf children, and even some hearing children who showed an interest in learning basic sign language. Jacob, on the other hand, had become something of a celebrity at school. His story of resilience inspired other students, and he was often invited to share his experiences in lessons about diversity and inclusion. But not everything was perfect. Like any real family, the Thompsons faced daily challenges. One Thursday morning, Richard received a phone call that would disrupt the peaceful course their lives had taken. "Hello, Mr. Thompson. This is Dr. Miller from Family Court." Richard's stomach tightened. Official calls always made him nervous, even after all these months. "Good morning, Doctor. Is there an issue with Jacob's paperwork?" "Not exactly an issue, but a situation that needs to be resolved. A woman has come forward claiming to be Jacob's aunt. She wants custody of the child." Richard's world seemed to stop. "What do you mean? Jacob is an orphan. He has no living family." "According to this woman, she's the sister of Jacob's mother. She says she's been searching for him for years and only just discovered he was in your care." Richard sank heavily into his office chair. "What's the next step?" "I need you to come to court tomorrow morning and bring Jacob. We'll hear from all parties involved and decide what's best for the child." After hanging up, Richard stood frozen for several minutes, trying to process the information. How would he tell Jennifer? How would he tell Jacob? And most importantly, how would he tell Ethan that he might lose his brother? He decided not to say anything to the boys until he had more details. He called Jennifer at work and asked her to come home immediately. When Jennifer arrived, she found Richard pacing nervously around the living room. "What happened? You sounded very strange on the phone." Richard told her about the call from the court. He watched Jennifer's face pale. An aunt? What do you mean? Jacob never mentioned any aunt. Maybe he didn't know, or maybe she's only showing up now because she found out he's with a well-off family. Jennifer sat on the couch, running her hands through her hair. Richard, I can't lose Jacob. He's my son now. I know. I can't either. But if she really is his biological family, where was this woman when Jacob was living on the streets? Where was she when he was starving, when he slept under underpasses? We don't know yet. Maybe she has an explanation. Jennifer stood abruptly. What explanation could possibly justify abandoning a child for years? Richard was just as upset, but he tried to stay calm. Jennifer, we need to think like lawyers right now. We'll hire the best family lawyer in the city. We'll fight for Jacob. That evening during dinner, the boys noticed their parents were different. Dad, Mom, are you okay? Jacob asked, with the sensitivity he always showed in picking up mood changes. Richard and Jennifer exchanged glances. We're fine, son, just had a busy day at work. Jacob didn't seem entirely convinced but didn't press further. After the boys went to bed, Richard and Jennifer stayed up late discussing strategies and possible scenarios. What if she really is his aunt? Jennifer asked. Then we'll prove Jacob is better off here, that he has a structured life, quality education, unconditional love. And if the judge decides biological family takes precedence, Richard held Jennifer's hand. We won't let that happen without a fight. Jacob chose to be our son. That has to count for something. The next morning, they hired Mr. Howard Douglas, a family law attorney with over 20 years of experience. I need to be honest with you, Mr. Douglas said during their first consultation. Cases involving biological family are always complex. Courts tend to favor blood relatives, especially if they demonstrate suitable conditions to raise the child. But Jacob was abandoned, Jennifer protested. He lived on the streets for years. That will work in our favor, but we need to be prepared for questions about where this aunt was, why she didn't look for Jacob sooner, and what her current living situation is. What about Jacob's opinion? Richard asked. Doesn't he have a say? He does, and that's another strong point. Children Jacob's age already have their opinions considered by judges, especially in cases where they show emotional stability and established bonds. Mr. Douglas paused. But I must warn you, if this woman truly is a biological relative and demonstrates suitable conditions, it will be an uphill battle. Biological family carries significant legal weight. Leaving the lawyer's office, Richard and Jennifer were somber. Maybe we should tell Jacob, Jennifer suggested. He has a right to know. What if he panics? What if it affects his school performance, his relationship with Ethan? What if he finds out another way? That would be worse. Richard knew Jennifer was right. That afternoon, they called Jacob into the living room for a talk. Jacob, I need to tell you something important, Richard began. The boy sat on the couch, immediately tense. Did I do something wrong? No, son, not at all. But a woman has come forward claiming to be your aunt. She wants to meet you. Jacob was silent for a long moment. Aunt from which side? My mom's or my dad's? She says she's your mother's sister. My mom never mentioned any sister, neither did my grandma. Jennifer moved closer to Jacob. Do you remember any relatives from your mother's side? Jacob shook his head. My grandma always said it was just the three of us, her, me, and my mom. After my mom left, it was just me and her. Richard and Jennifer had long noticed Jacob avoided talking about losing his mother, always using euphemisms. Jacob, do you want to meet this aunt? Jennifer asked. The boy looked at her with tear-filled eyes. Are you going to send me away? Richard immediately knelt in front of Jacob. Never, son. You're our child forever, but we need to handle this legally. What if she wants me to live with her? Jennifer hugged Jacob. We'll fight for you to stay here, but we want you to know that no matter what happens, you'll always be our son. Jacob cried quietly for a few minutes. Can I tell Ethan? Of course. You two can talk about everything. That night, Richard and Jennifer heard hushed whispers coming from the boys' room. Ethan had been visibly shaken by the news and was trying to comfort Jacob, even though he didn't fully understand the legal implications of the situation. On the day of the hearing, the entire Thompson family arrived at the court early. Mr. Howard Douglas met them at the entrance. "How are you all holding up?" "Nervous," Richard answered honestly. "That's natural. Remember, stay calm, answer only what's asked, and show the natural love you have for Jacob." Inside the courtroom, Richard and Jennifer saw a woman around 40 years old, slender, dressed in simple but clean clothes. She watched them with an expression that mixed nervousness and determination. The judge, Judge Thomas Burton, was a man in his 50s, known for his careful approach in cases involving minors. "Good morning, everyone. We're here to resolve the matter of custody for the minor Jacob Thompson Wells. First, I'd like to hear from Mrs. Sharon Wells." The woman stood up. "Your Honor, my name is Sharon Wells. I'm the younger sister of Laura Wells, Jacob's mother. I've been searching for my nephew for 5 years." "Why did it take so long to find him?" the judge asked. Sharon hesitated. "When my sister passed away, I was going through personal difficulties. I had just gotten divorced, was unemployed, living with friends. I wasn't in a position to care for a child." "And now you are?" "Yes, Your Honor. I've secured a stable job as a cook in a restaurant. I have a small but suitable apartment. And most importantly, I've always felt remorse for not being there for Jacob when he needed me." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. The woman's sincerity was evident. "Mrs. Wells, did you know Jacob was living on the streets?" "I suspected, but I wasn't sure. I searched shelters in the area, but I was told he had run away several times. Only recently did I discover he was with a family." The judge took notes and turned to Richard and Jennifer. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, how did you obtain custody of Jacob?" Richard recounted the entire story, the encounter in the square, the abandonment, their decision to take responsibility for the boy. "And how has his adjustment been?" Jennifer answered, describing Jacob's progress in school, Ethan's transformation, and the family harmony that had developed. "Jacob, could you come forward?" the judge called. The boy stood up, clearly nervous, and approached the judge's bench. "Jacob, do you remember this woman?" Jacob looked at Sharon for a long moment. "No, Your Honor." "She says she's your aunt, your mother's sister." Jacob continued staring at Sharon. "My mother never mentioned any sister, and neither did my grandmother." Sharon leaned forward. "Jacob, do I look like your mother? Look at me closely." The boy studied Sharon's face carefully. Slowly, a glimmer of recognition crossed his eyes. "A little. Mostly the eyes." "Jacob," Sharon continued, tears in her eyes. "Your mother's name was Laura, right? And your grandmother was Mrs. Harper?" Jacob nodded, surprised. "How do you know?" "Because I really am your aunt, and I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you needed me." The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of Sharon's tears. The judge leaned forward. "Jacob, is there anything you'd like to say?" The boy looked at Sharon, then at Richard and Jennifer. "Your Honor, can I ask my aunt a question?" "Of course." Jacob turned to Sharon. "Where were you when I was living on the streets, when I was hungry, when I was afraid to sleep because I could get hurt?" The question hit Sharon like a punch. She began crying harder. "Jacob, I was trying to fix my own life. I know it's no excuse. I know I failed you. Why do you want to take me now? Because you're my family, and because I want to try to make up for the mistake I made." Jacob fell silent for a moment, then turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, may I say something?" "Go ahead, Jacob." "I understand she's my aunt, and I'm not angry with her. But Richard and Jennifer saved me. They gave me a family when I had no one. Ethan is my brother. I don't want to leave my home." The judge took more notes. "Jacob, do you understand that if it's decided you should live with your aunt, you could still visit your adoptive family? It's not the same, Your Honor. Family isn't just about who visits. It's about who's there every day, who takes care of you when you're sick, who helps with homework." The maturity of his answer impressed the entire room. "Mrs. Sharon, what do you have to say?" Sharon wiped her tears. "Your Honor, looking at Jacob now, seeing how he's grown, how well cared for he is, how articulate he is, I realize my sister would be proud, and I see he's found a family that truly loves him." She paused. "I'd like to be part of his life. I'd like to get to know him, to really be his aunt, but I don't want to take him away from a family that's made him happy." The judge was surprised. "Mrs. Sharon, are you withdrawing your custody claim?" "I am, Your Honor. But I'd like to request visitation rights if possible. I want to know my nephew, tell him about his mother, about our family. But he deserves to stay where he's happy." Richard and Jennifer exchanged glances, surprised and relieved. The judge smiled, a rare expression in hearings. "That's a very wise decision, Mrs. Sharon. And you, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, would you agree to visitation rights?" Jennifer stood up. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I'd like to suggest something different. Go ahead." "What if, instead of visits, Sharon became part of our extended family? Jacob needs to know his roots, his history. We could all benefit from this connection." Richard nodded. "I agree with my wife. Sharon, would you like to have lunch with us this Sunday?" Sharon looked at them in disbelief. "You do that, even after I tried to take Jacob from you?" "You didn't try to take me," Jacob interjected. "You tried to do what was right. It's different." The judge banged the gavel. "Case resolved. Custody remains with Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. I establish an open family arrangement between the parties, based on the maturity and goodwill everyone has shown today." Outside the courthouse, Sharon approached Richard and Jennifer. "Thank you for letting me be part of his life. Thank you for understanding what was best for Jacob," Jennifer replied. Jacob walked up to Sharon. "Aunt Sharon, can you tell me about my mother? I don't remember much. I can tell you many stories. Your mother was a lot like you, brave, smart, kind. And you can meet my brother Ethan, he'll like you." Sharon smiled. "I look forward to meeting your whole family." The following Sunday, Sharon arrived at the Thompsons' house, carrying an old photo album and some recipes that had belonged to Jacob's mother. Ethan was shy at first, but quickly warmed up to Sharon when she showed interest in learning basic signs. Jacob spent hours looking at photos of his young mother, listening to stories about her childhood, understanding where he came from. "Your mother loved plants," Sharon said. "Just like your grandmother. Must run in the family." Jacob smiled. "I do too. I take care of the garden here." At lunch, Richard noticed how Sharon's presence filled a missing piece for Jacob. The boy asked questions about family, traditions, things only a blood relative could answer. After lunch, Sharon helped teach Jacob how to make his mother's specialty, cornbread. "Your mother made this whenever she was sad," Sharon explained. "She said mixing the dough helped clear her thoughts. That's why I like working with my hands," Jacob realized. "When I do origami or work in the garden, I feel calmer." "It's exactly how your mother used to be." Jennifer watched the flour-covered kitchen, the two of them preparing the cake while Ethan tried to help, making quite a mess. It was a chaotic and perfect family scene. When Sharon was getting ready to leave, Jacob hugged her. "Aunt Sharon, thank you for giving up on taking me away." "Jacob, family isn't about owning people. It's about loving them and wanting what's best for them. You already had a family who loves you. I just wanted to be part of it too." "Now we're a bigger family," Ethan signaled, and Sharon was starting to understand. "That's true," Sharon agreed, "and I like big families." 2 years had passed. The Thompson-Wells family, as they'd begun calling themselves after Sharon suggested Jacob hyphenate his last name to honor both his families, had found a perfect balance. Jacob, now 11, was in 6th grade and excelled especially in science and math. He'd discovered a passion for astronomy and spent hours on the terrace stargazing with the telescope Richard had given him for his birthday. Ethan, at 8, still attended the special school, but had also started inclusion classes at a regular school twice a week. His sign vocabulary had expanded dramatically, and he was beginning to vocalize some simple words. Sharon visited the family every 2 weeks and had become a constant presence at family celebrations. She'd taught Jacob how to cook several family recipes and shared stories that helped the boy better understand his roots. Richard had made a surprising discovery. Late fatherhood had awakened a patience and sensitivity in him he never knew he had. He became more involved in community activities, especially projects related to deaf children's inclusion. Jennifer had returned to full-time work, but now focused on social responsibility projects. She'd started an ad campaign for an NGO that worked with orphaned children, inspired by Jacob's story. One Friday evening, as the family watched a movie with subtitles for Ethan, Jacob made an observation that surprised everyone. "Dad, Mom, can I say something?" "Of course, son." "Sometimes I think maybe everything happened the way it was supposed to." Richard turned down the TV volume. "How so?" "If I hadn't lived on the streets, if my grandmother hadn't gotten sick, if I hadn't run away from the shelter, maybe I'd never have found you, and Ethan would have never had a brother." Jennifer felt her eyes fill with tears. "And maybe Aunt Sharon would have never learned how to be part of a family again," Ethan added in signs. Jacob translated for Sharon, who was watching the movie with them. "That's true," Sharon agreed. "You've taught me that family isn't just blood, it's choice, it's love, it's being there." Richard hugged both boys. "You know what? Jacob's right. If everything had been different, we wouldn't be here now, in this moment, being the family we are." "And are we a good family?" Ethan asked. "The best," they all answered in unison. Later that night, after the boys had gone to bed, Richard and Jennifer talked on the porch. "Do you regret anything?" Jennifer asked. Richard thought for a moment. "I regret not meeting Jacob sooner, that he suffered alone for so long. But he wouldn't be the boy he is if he hadn't gone through all that. His compassion, his maturity, the way he cares for Ethan, all of that came from the hard experiences he had." "That's true. And to think I almost didn't let him play with Ethan that first day." "What made you change your mind?" Richard smiled. Ethan's smile. "It was the first time I saw our son genuinely happy. How could I deny him that? What now? Now I have 2 genuinely happy children, and a family I didn't even know I was looking for." Jennifer nestled into her husband's arm. "Richard, can I confess something?" "Of course." "At first I was terrified. I thought Jacob might be dangerous, that he could negatively influence Ethan. And now? Now I realize it was Ethan who needed Jacob's influence. Ethan was too sheltered, too isolated. Jacob taught him to be brave, to communicate, to trust people. And Jacob taught us how to be a real family." At that moment they heard bare footsteps in the house. Jacob appeared on the porch, carrying Ethan in his arms. "Sorry to bother you. Ethan had a nightmare." Ethan made quick signs, which Jacob translated. "He dreamed we were being separated, that I was leaving." Jennifer held out her arms to Ethan. "Come here, sweetheart. That will never happen." "Never, ever," Ethan signed. "Never," Richard confirmed. "You two are stuck with us forever." Jacob laughed. "Then it's a good kind of stuck. The best kind in the world," Jennifer agreed, hugging both boys. They stood there, the 4 of them embraced on the porch, watching the stars Jacob had taught Ethan to identify. It was an imperfect family, formed by chance and cemented by choice, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. 5 years later, Jacob was in his 2nd year of high school, and Ethan in 7th grade. The family had moved to a bigger house, with a home office for Richard and a special room for Ethan's therapy sessions. Jacob had grown into an articulate, focused 16-year-old. His plans included studying medicine, inspired by his desire to help other vulnerable children. He remained Ethan's natural protector, but had learned to balance that responsibility with his own interests and needs. Ethan, now 13, was thriving. He attended a full-time inclusive school and had become an excellent student in math and science. His communication had improved dramatically. He used both signs and speech, depending on the situation and the person he was interacting with. The brothers' friendship had evolved into a true partnership. They had different interests. Jacob loved astronomy and chemistry, while Ethan was passionate about programming and graphic design. But they still shared everything and supported each other through every challenge. Sharon had become a constant presence in the family's life. She lived in an apartment just a few blocks away and joined them for dinner at least 3 times a week. She had become the grandmother Ethan never had, and the connection to the past Jacob needed. One Sunday afternoon, as the family prepared a barbecue in the backyard, Jacob made an announcement that surprised everyone. "Everyone, I have something important to say." They all stopped what they were doing. "I got accepted into the university's science research program. I'll be able to take advanced chemistry and biology classes on weekends." Richard dropped the spatula he was holding. "Jacob, that's fantastic. When do classes start?" "Next month. But there's one thing." "What?" "The program is all day on Saturdays. It means I won't be able to help Ethan with his science projects anymore." Ethan walked up to his brother and signed quickly. Jacob translated, smiling. "He said it's about time I stopped doing his homework for him and that he can manage on his own." "It's true," Ethan confirmed aloud, carefully articulating. "I'm big now." Jennifer teared up hearing Ethan speak. Even after all these years, she was still amazed by her son's progress. "Ethan, are you sure you don't mind?" she asked. Ethan nodded eagerly. "Jacob needs to study to be a doctor. When he graduates, he can help other kids like us." The maturity of the response impressed everyone present. "Besides," Ethan continued, "Aunt Sharon can help me with the projects. She's really good at science, too." Sharon smiled. "It would be my pleasure, Ethan. I love science projects." During lunch, the conversation revolved around future plans. Jacob talked about his passion for medicine and his dream of working with children. Ethan shared his growing interest in programming and design, mentioning he'd like to create educational games for deaf children. "You two are going to change the world," Richard commented proudly. "Not the whole world," Jacob corrected, "but maybe we can help a few people, like you helped me." "And like you helped me," Ethan added. Jennifer watched her sons, no longer boys, but young men with dreams and aspirations of their own. She felt a mix of pride and nostalgia. "You know something," she said. "When Richard decided to take responsibility for Jacob that day in the square, I thought he'd lost his mind." "And now?" Richard asked playfully. "Now I know it was the sanest decision we ever made." Jacob stood up and hugged Jennifer. "Thank you, Mom, for accepting a strange boy who appeared out of nowhere." "Thank you for teaching us what real family means," Jennifer replied. Ethan joined the hug, followed by Richard and Sharon. It was a simple moment but full of meaning. 5 different people, brought together by unlikely circumstances, choosing to be family every day. Later, when the guests had left and the house was quiet, Jacob and Ethan talked in their room as they had every night for years. "Ethan, can I ask you something?" Jacob said. "Of course. Do you remember what it was like before we met?" Ethan thought for a moment. "I remember feeling very alone. Even with Dad and Mom, I felt like something was missing." "What?" "I didn't know back then. But now I know it was you. I needed a brother." Jacob smiled. "I needed a family too. But more than that, I needed to learn what it means to be loved unconditionally. And did you learn?" "I did. And you taught me a lot too." "What did I teach you?" Jacob reflected. "You taught me that being different doesn't mean being less. That everyone has their own way of communicating with the world, and that real communication doesn't need words." Ethan was silent for a moment. "Jacob, do you think our story will have a happy ending?" "Ethan, our story doesn't have an ending. It continues every day. And every day we choose to be brothers, it gets a little happier. So let's choose to be brothers forever?" "Forever." The two hugged, and Ethan fell asleep on Jacob's shoulder, as he had done thousands of times over the years. Jacob stayed awake a little longer, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. From the square in front of the bank to this cozy room, they had gone through moments of uncertainty, fear, joy, and discovery. He looked out the window and saw the stars he had taught Ethan to identify. Each constellation had a story, just like their family. They were isolated points of light that, when seen together, formed something greater and more beautiful. Their family had started as separate points: a workaholic executive, an anxious mother, a deaf child, an orphan from the streets, a regretful aunt. But together, they had created something extraordinary. Jacob fell asleep smiling, knowing he would wake up surrounded by people who loved him not in spite of his differences, but because of them. and that he had found not just a house, but a home. The end of the story. And now, dear listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. What did you think of the Thompson family's journey? Do you believe Richard made the right decision by taking responsibility for Jacob? And what do you think about how Sharon handled the situation when she discovered her nephew? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to read your heartfelt words. Don't forget to leave a like if this story moved you in any way, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one. Thank you so much for your company.